Sure.
All right, Johnny, thanks for joining me. Thanks for making the time.
Absolutely.
So the question I want, what sport did you coach?
Football, youth
Okay.
football.
Why did you choose football? Like, did you ever think about coaching a different sport?
I mean, I have dabbled in high school baseball, a couple of different capacities. But the shorter version of joining football was my brother was in sixth grade at the time, and I knew a bunch of the kids. I knew about some of the coaches, and I actually was just telling the story the other day that in short, the lineman didn't know what a 3-point stance was,
Okay.
and after I find that out, I'm like, how are you not doing that? Talked to the coaches. I was like, "You guys want some help?" And of course, knowing the coaches, like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I really, really casually jumped on that one year. I was in college, an hour away, so I had to do some, driving back and forth. Then kind of jumped in the next 2 years. Yeah, next 2 years with his team, and then from there, I kind of jumped on staffs, and then eventually, I just never left.
All right. Uh, what would you say was like one of the toughest things that you had to deal with as a coach?
Yeah, honestly, it's the common thing. It's the parents.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other factors, but it's the parents because the kids are there to have fun.
Mhm.
And sure, you've got some hyper kids, some really, really timid, shy kids that need to get a little extra boost, encouragement, that kind of thing. But I kind of expected that. Like you kind of expect the players to be different, but not knowing the parents, and then all of a sudden, the first time you might interact with them, let's just say it's probably going to be a complaint. But you'll get your high fives and your accolades from the parents as well. But that was something that I mean, I have a coaching minor, and that's not something that came up a lot. Was dealing with parents and sort of the behind the scenes thing, like X's and O's. I was pretty confident dealing with child youth personalities. I was confident, but yeah, a little bit of all that.
Okay. Awesome. How long did you coach for?
Youth football was 16 seasons, then 2 years at a high school, and then 4 seasons overlapping with those high school of a summer league baseball league. So 22 seasons of sports over 20-ish years, 18 years.
How did you keep the morale up on such like on things like losing seasons or bad plays, things like that?
I had a few losing seasons. It's at the youth level, which means you're less competitive. It's not a varsity sport, as we like to remind the kids. Like my job isn't about wins and losses, as it is at the high school, varsity, and higher level. And I stand by this. And I've gotten some coaches, some head coaches, some board members, not big fans of mine because I always prioritized fun. Fun is number one, improving, development is number two, and then winning is third. My job as a youth coach is not to develop winners in terms of X's and O's or wins and losses. It's to make them have fun, to actually learn the game. And my personal goal, and it still has been, if I ever go back at the youth level, I want you to go play in high school. If you don't play football, that's fine. I mean, it'll break my heart a little bit, but play sports. So it's making it fun, whether you're the star athlete and there's no reason for me to take you off the field, or if you're the kid who doesn't have the talent necessarily to compete, it's still to make each of them having fun. And I've seen that plenty of those rough kids that either had the attitude or just didn't have the talent, didn't have the confidence. And seeing them grow from year to year, or when I was lucky enough to take a team from fifth to eighth, to see some of that development. I can tell stories till I'm blue in the face about that little shy kid in the corner who doesn't know how to put his helmet on, and all of a sudden he's making tackles, in games. So that's been the fun part.
I know for me, when I coached my first year, I was coaching it was U10s because then I moved up to middle school. And one of the biggest things like trying to get the kids being able to like focus. So I had a
Sure.
goalie that actually we practiced right next to a dog park. So he would just sit down and play with grass or look at the dogs. And I will never forget his name. His name was Billy. And I always tell him like, "Hey Billy, you come on, buddy, you got to get in the game." He's like, "Did you see that dog over there? I think he wants me to go play." So for me, that was like one of the biggest challenges. And
Yeah.
later could come find out, I mean, he had ADHD. So
Okay.
something like I felt like I should like been able to catch a little bit sooner because I know he wasn't able to really like focus as a goalie. But then I put him out in the outfield, and he did it so much better, because he was playing around like the ball, so he had like attention span.
Well, sure.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
leads me to my next questions. Did you have to deal with any like mental issues around like around your kids?
Oh yeah. I mean, from ADHD, I learned that sort of the hard way in terms of, it was certainly a diagnosable thing. But parents oftentimes either just you didn't know, or it wasn't diagnosed, or if it was, they didn't want me to know to some extent because they thought I would treat their kid differently.
Yeah,
Which, quite probably, I have to treat your kid differently, and that's not a bad thing. Like, let me cater to the needs. If I need to have him like literally grab him by the face mask and just have him like eye to eye,
yeah,
I'll do that. Give him instruction. Now, if I can't just shout a thing with some kids,
yeah.
um, so from that, self-confidence, it sort of plays into the mental. And then it was near the latter part of my career that I think sort of the anxiety and depression, which of course is really rampant today, slowly started to come into the factor. And it came into we dealt with bullying, which certainly plays into the mental illness and just depression and self-worth. A lot of kids middle school, again, this is middle school boys, so hormones are going crazy, which makes them more confident, less confident, nervous, scared. And it culminated with one of our kids who's they transferred right before the school year to our district. They came from Ohio, actually. And that was August. I met the kid, and due to bullying from online back home, as well as online in Milwaukee kids, and then in person with Milwaukee kids, he ended up taking his own life a few months after the season.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
So in terms of the how were you able to deal with like the after effects as a coach? Like
Of all that, or just anything?
I just like for like that specific if you want to talk about it, if not about about like different scenarios.
Sure. There were some incidences of, I think it was that year, maybe the year before, but it was the same era of team. I had the same team for 4 years. And essentially one of the kids was just kind of getting picked on more than usual. Like, not that any picking on is okay, but there's a level amount that you're kind of used to and you just kind of grow into.
Mhm.
And then there's the excessive amount. And one of the parents told me about that. I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I've not been aware of it. And she was not blaming me. She was more so bringing it to my attention. It's like it was one of the more goofier kids, the lesser talented. So I think, some of the more confident kids feel like that's more of an easy victim, an easy target. But that parent was like, "Can I come, hang out?" I was like, "Absolutely! Like, you're welcome at practices." I've never had closed door practices. I don't prefer parents to be there because they can become a distraction. But before I could even say anything, mom's like, "I'm just going to stay on the sideline." I think her presence, would keep the kids at bay, and sure enough, it did. But we had to address that. And once I learned of this, once the parent brought it to my attention, I had a nice little heart to heart with the boys. Like, that's not acceptable. Like, I don't care if the kid is the dorkiest, weirdest. He doesn't fit with your group. Like, you don't treat him like that. You're still brother. You're still on the same team, whether it's on the football field or in the classroom. Like, I don't tolerate that stuff. So yeah, you have to address it head on. To me, I'm not a big personal confrontation guy in my own life,
Mhm.
but when it's with kids, like, I don't have any issue. Now, I don't say pulling punches like it's mean or rude, but like, we're gonna talk. It's a little bit different with like one of my close friends. Like, you hurt my feelings. That's a little bit harder. But with the kids, like, look, I'm the adult, and it's not a power trip, but it's a matter of like, I know what's right and wrong. I know what's going on. I may not know who's doing what, but let's put the kibosh on that. And as far as I know, we never had another incident, at least not with that kid. And actually, he kind of got a little bit better. And I'm not sure if that had anything to do with it, but he improved a little bit to the point where he warranted some more playing time. And next thing you know, like, the kid, like, you can see him like having good times with the guys. So I'm like, I don't know what happened, but he got better. The kids seemed to accept him more, and there was less bullying. So I was happy to hear that he kind of turned a corner and kind of found a group of kids to hang out within the team.
Yeah, well, that's really nice because to hear that because I was actually at a football game a couple months ago. My friend, he's actually the same age as I am. His son is 12 or 10. So around the age, he just started playing tackle. And same scenario, some kids were bullying him. He told his dad, he thought that since dad's special forces army, he thought he was gonna get mad at him.
Sure.
We were all hanging around, and he was telling us a story. And obviously, like all the military people were like, "Oh, you need to tell him he needs to do this, you need to do that, you blah blah blah." Just trying to get computational. And I was really surprised of how his dad actually reacted. He said that he just went and talked to the coach, and the coach he said he really didn't want to do anything due to the fact that the reason why they were picking on him it was because the other kid was jealous of his son due to the fact that he was doing a lot better in terms of like the team, tackles, etc.
Mm.
Which is just really surprising how like the stigma where when you get picked on, like different scenarios, like, hey, let me go see how practice is versus another parent just going over and talk to the coach and see like the different varieties or like how the coach actually reacts to each one.
Oh, for sure. And I've heard stories from other coaches, other staffs, even coaches I've worked with. I did work with them at first, and I worked with them after the fact. Like this is how I run things. This is how I run a team. And I always take on, for a number of those years I was head coach. Some years I'm an assistant. So it kind of depends on where your role is in the staff or in the organization. But I've never had an issue with like, and then thing I go back to, like, unless you're a coach in an organization and you are under sort of the same umbrella of teaching or learning or how things are done, I care, but like I don't care if you coach football in another organization. Like that's great, cool. Maybe you have some insight. I'll learn from you, but this isn't your organization. Like this isn't how we run things here. We don't tolerate this, that, and other thing. And I've had plenty of competitions with plenty of parents in all sorts of topics, but thankfully the bullying one, they bring it to attention. We do our best to address it, and I've never had any real severe or strong issues on it repeating or becoming a much bigger problem.
Okay, well that's good. It's good to hear. Were there any like early signs in terms of like bullying or like depression that you saw in like your athletes at all?
I can't say that at the time. No, I wouldn't have recognized it then. I don't know that I would probably classify those signs that I think I did see as more of just lacking self-confidence. Is there deeper issues in there? Yeah, probably there were. At the time, I would have thought they were just very timid, shy, which is its own thing. But then I think that also can be a precursor to some of the more severe things. There was one kid, and I don't think, because I think I've seen him on social media that he wanted to have I think he joined like tennis or swimming. But I remember this kid quite vividly. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the drills we did were a little bit more barbaric than they are today, where it's just like ramming each other. And I remember it as it was yesterday. This was at least 20 years ago. The kid, every time that drill came up, he was always just managed to always get skipped every single time. Like, hey man, little Johnny, he hasn't gone yet. Like what? Sure enough, I mean, he was trying to skip the drill. And we talked to I was the assistant coach at the time, and I was maybe year 3 of coaching. And the head coach then talked to the dad. I was like, look, your kid does not want to be out here. We don't want to force him. Like he's small, he's undersized, clearly lacking confidence. And kid's like, and mom or dad was like, he's got to toughen up. It's still that old school mentality. And we're like, we're not going to put him out there. Like he's not going to play. It's a safety risk to him. He wants nothing to do with contact. He shies away from it. And in football, you don't want to be the nail. You want to be the hammer. And the more you're the nail, like it's going to hurt and he's going to get hurt. I think we finally convinced mom and dad to at least basically pull him. Like, go find something else. Go find any other sport and activity. But it's those types of things I look back now, 5, 10, 20 years removed of like, was he depressed? I don't think so. I think he was football wasn't his thing, which is cool. But then I go back to like, oh, that kid, he or he had an aggression issue. Is that the way of reacting to other things going on? Obviously, so that's why kids often bullies, because they're deprived in another area. But
yeah, because I had a kid when I first started. I think it might have been my 2nd or 3rd year. That's when I moved up to high school, and really shy, really quiet guy. But when he got out on the field, he was like kind of like a whole different person. Very vocal. Like pass me the ball, I'm right here. Things like that. Things you see like a soccer player. And then when I noticed he was a little bit more down than usual, but he was still the same player out in the field. And then I come to find out he just stopped showing up to practice. And I asked the other coach, and I'm like, hey, Wes, I can't remember his name to be completely honest with you. I'm like, what happened to our athlete? And he's like, oh, I found out that his mom had cancer, so I don't think he's gonna be coming back. I'm like, oh, really? And so, like you said, like looking back on it, like there was early signs. Like I feel like I should have done a little bit more, but then his mom ended up passing away not too long after that. So it's just one of those things that I do have like on my regret like bucket list that feel like I should have done a little bit more towards him. So
oh yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. My brother is still coaching, and I've jumped on his staff sort of occasionally. And he had a kid whose mom, I mean, had I believe it was cancer, and passed. And I didn't know that at the time. Like, I kind of knew she was sick, and then I later heard, like, the next year, obviously, she didn't make it much longer. And his behavior in school just flipped. Didn't care, was out late. He took my brother takes an annual baseball trip, and the kid ended up not qualifying for it because he got in trouble severely enough in school with a few other kids. And the other kids, it was sort of a one-off kind of thing, but for him, it was just like the sixth thing that he just kind of did. And it's a direct result of his mom's passing. Like, there's no doubt, and all the teachers know that. I mean, you try to support the kid, you try to do what you can, but he's 16, 17, and all of a sudden your mom's sick and then dying and then gone. At young adult years, it's not easy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially for like a young adult, it says it's supposed to be like it's a transitioning period from like adolescence to adulthood. And speaking of support, how do you guys have any like kind of real support from like the school at all in terms of like for those kind of situations?
So for the majority of my football career was through first we were an independent program, and then we partnered essentially with the rec department or the school district. As we had to be, but then we became actually a rec sport affiliate. So we went from being like operating independently to essentially being tucked under the rec department. So not a whole lot from schools directly. We feed from 2 to 3 elementary schools. And because football, obviously, there was a whole month of the season prior to being in school, kids come from schools. We never had super strong ties with any of the schools, counselors, those types of things. And obviously, rec department doesn't have any sort of counselors or anything. So not a whole lot. There's enough adults, parents, staff that, I could have leaned on to some degree, but nothing in terms of, diagnosing or suspiciousness of, depression, anxiety, those types of things. And it wasn't really talked about either. When I last left, I last coached in 2018. And as the board president of our organization, I went to board meetings, and that never was a topic. It was a lot of other, X's and O's and league types of things. So it never came up. The clinics I've been to, I've never really discussed the mental aspect of being an athlete.
I know when we would do every season, we would always do like a registration. We have to do 2 to 3 hours of just getting evaluated if we're still able to coach. Pretty much it's just about organization between you and the athletes, etc. But one thing that I do wish, for example, like in the rec league that I coach, we don't really address those kinds of issues, even like on meetings. It's just this is how much it's gonna be, like concession stands, etc. It's just like money, and then it goes like, here's your schedule, like you go on about your day. I understand that all of us are like volunteers to a certain degree, but I do wish like we had at least somebody like in the board of the directors of my league. There was like some sort of affiliated with like social work, psychiatrist, something like that. It can be kind of like a backup for situations like this.
Yeah.
So you mentioned being in the board of directors. Is that something that you ever thought about bringing it up, or?
I just don't know. So it happened. The kid's passing happened after essentially what ended up being my second to last season. So we went into the next year, and there's still pictures, which I love looking back on. We still have pictures from the team. I ended up getting like essentially teal medical tape, which teal has a number of illness, diseases, affiliation, but one of which is mental health. And so we had the boys tape up their wrists every game and wore that. And we did a number of talk about it in general. So we started addressing it as a team as a whole. I want to say, now that I think about it, there might have been a really, now I can think, yeah. Of course, now you're bringing all these memories up. There was definitely another, but very small, like situation where I heard some of my own kids were picking on another kid in school. I don't remember if the kid they were picking on was actually a football player on the team, or if he was just another student. I'm like, Al, I got livid by myself.
Yeah.
Did not show all that to the team, but I was like, you do not do that. I don't care if he deserves it in your mind based on some silly middle school thing, or if you're just bored or whatever. Like, no. And we addressed it, and I didn't hear any hiccups after that. But in terms of like So as a team and as a organization of our program, I kind of brought up a little bit, we determined what we could do as an organization, kind of to honor the kid for one, but we also, and that's when I actually started linking up with one of the principals of the middle school, just kind of told him I was aware of things. Here's what happened. Keep an eye on these 12 kids who are in your building. These are the teammates, at least some of them super close. So I actually had like essentially the principal on speed dial. So we were texting quite a bit throughout that. And then making sure, and I was letting know the kids at my school that, they were on, that the school was on alert in terms of the counselors, those types of things. And then through the rec department and the athletic department, we made sure the other schools were informed. And then we also want to be very cognizant, which I learned more. I don't have a social work background yet. I do work in social work. They didn't want it to be sort of glorified, where they were kind of fearing that if kids thought like, oh, you get this, okay, we're not going to do a statue, but like if you're doing that type of thing and all these honoring things, like kids who are on that edge might see like, well, if I take my own life, they're gonna remember me in this way, which I was like, my mind was blown. It's like I never thought of that. Like 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds seeing, if you put a picture up in the kids in the gym or something, like they might think that's a good thing and they want to get that, and the only way to get that. So those were addressed. As I said, I learned a lot that year. But I brought it up in the gosh, when did that come up in the league meetings? I'm trying to remember how that went down, but we never really addressed it in terms of like, let's add this to coaches training. To your point, all the trainings, the clinics I've been to, the majority are just X's and O's. But there were some that are, like safety, proper tackling, concussion protocols, those types of things. And some of it did dabble on like the parental aspect of things and how to handle that kind of thing. But we never once really got into mental health, really.
In terms of like concussions, I know there's a stigma of like I know like the 80s, we always see it in movies, especially football movies. It's like, oh, you get a dislocated shoulder, get a concussion, you got to get back out there, you got to leave it all on the field. Do you think there has to like that's still happening like today, or just that's not seen as
You watch a bit of the NFL, right?
Yeah.
Tua Tagovailoa, Miami's quarterback. I watched that film. Like I didn't see it live, but I saw the clips. When you get up from the ground and you're staggering as if you're drunk or something, you were not back on that field. He was back out to the next play.
Yeah.
Turns out that week or two later, they fired the third-party doctor guy. But yeah, absolutely. And especially that it's still a bit different to me at pro sports because there it's all about the money. Yeah. Like they know they do the wins. The wins make money. High school, okay, it's your job, but pretty much no high school coach is dependent on that job as his. It's a side thing. So to me, you don't put your own like livelihood, or I'm a 2-time state champion coach. Like if that kid's injured, you pull him without question. But yeah, I do think there's the stigma of toughing it out. There's the stigma of I don't want to, and the other thing too, we have to consider the kids don't want to admit they're hurt. Mm-hmm. We have to deal with like trying to determine how serious it is. Like, does it hurt? Kind of. Yeah. Like it hurts, or like, oh, it's a hangnail or a jammed finger. But yeah, I've definitely had to try and essentially see if kids are lying and see how severe it is. When in doubt, you're out. Like we didn't mess around, especially those last few years. We don't mess around. Like I don't care if I have to lose this game. I don't care if we're embarrass ourselves on the field. I'm not risking your health because it's just not worth it.
Yeah, I know for like, I mean, especially like broken bones, dislocation, like, you feel the pain. Like that's
right.
I mean, how would you be able to like tell a kid or tell like one of your athletes, like how do you measure like mental health, like to an athlete? How would you like be able to deal with that? Because I know it's difficult even for me to even like say like measure like for me. So how can you tell like 12, 13-year-old how to like measure how they feel?
I don't think. I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the kids I know, and I mean, I'm still in touch with a lot of them. I was actually watching all of them. My last team are currently seniors. The one thing, and this is not any sort of reliable, proven theory, but with kids, they don't hide things very well. If you get a kid who's high energy, always talking, almost too much, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's that change. You can figure out why. Okay, is it just because they lost the game? Or if a kid who's not normally sassy or sarcastic and all of a sudden that changes. To me, those are like those personality changes are kind of reddish flag of like, I'm gonna keep my eye on that kid. Or I have had a parent or two tell me something that went on at school or they got in trouble for things. And the parents were often good at not trying to hold football hostage in terms of like, well, you screwed on in school, so now you can't go to practice. I get it, and some parents still do, and it's hard to disagree. But on the other hand, like, we know this is an out, and we know this is going to be a good thing for them. But if they're grumpier than normal, that's because they know they're coming home and getting punished. I'm like, good to know. So, yeah, to me, like, change the behavior, and especially if they're sharp.
Yeah.
Those are the best I can do. Again, and again, I only see kids a couple hours a day. I don't live with them. I don't, see them at school. So I get such a small segment of their life to best assess what's going on.
Yeah, I know. I know for me, it was always a challenge, especially in the beginning, because in the beginning I was one of three coaches, and then we coach four different levels, but we never got more than 30 kids in a
Sure.
practice. So I mean, it was always like 15 on 15. So like all three of us were able to kind of like divide and see which one was it is. Like for you, I know football has way more players that you guys have to like. So how do you like divide your attention to all of them, or like you know what I mean? So in terms of like this kid needs that, so needs that,
Yeah, I mean, I think the highest roster I've probably had have only been in the low 30s, 34, I want to say was the highest. And some rosters, those, you talk about when those losing seasons,
Yeah.
have had 14, 15 kids.
Yeah.
And when there's 11 on the field, then you need 22 to start a game. Having 14, 16 kids isn't good. So to some extent, at one point, the coach to athlete ratio was in our favor. Like, I could manage three kids. Those bigger rosters, I always try to get more coaches. That's the first thing, is like, you try to keep, there is no magic ratio, but you try to keep as many coaches as you can for more kids that you have. I've also, and I actually was just talking about this too the other day with some past parents. If I got back into coaching, I would jump in at like the assistant level. I always loved being able to take a group of four, a group of five, three receivers. I can't coach 30 kids at once. It's literally impossible. And if I can't do it, then I was lucky enough, I had six assistants my last couple of years. So they would break down, I would bounce around. I personally tried to get to know each kid as best I can. Some kids are easier because they're more vocal, other kids are quieter, to try and look on those traits. And obviously a lot of it has to do with skills. You're really trying to develop the kid to catch the ball better, to block better. You try to have some conversations off the field too, but yeah, I try to bounce as the head coach, and as an assistant, you get to know your group guys, whether it's the linemen or the receivers or the running backs. You get to know that group better, but they struggle to meet the kids at a deeper level from the other positions.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Johnny. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Adam. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you taking the time, especially being late and all. So let's get started. So, what do you do for a living?
I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
How long you been a social worker for?
About 11 years.
In those 11 years, have you ever given therapy to any kids, teenage athletes of some sort?
Yeah, a few. I work mostly with children, and so some of them are athletes.
What is a common problem that you see among those kids? For example, is it anxiety, addiction, depression, um, bullying?
Yeah, I would say most of them have some sort of anxiety disorder, just on varying levels. But with depression, suicidality, second and third. But I'm starting to notice a little more addiction coming in.
Okay. Funny how you mentioned addiction, because I had a coach that I spoke with not too long ago, said something about suicide. Are there any early symptoms that, as a coach or parent, we can try to find in terms of like to prevent such things?
Yeah, I would think an important thing is being available, being aware, and being open to hearing things that most people don't want to talk about suicide or depression because it's scary. It's a common mistake that if you mention suicide, you're going to give somebody the idea. That doesn't work. That's not real. Asking somebody if they're having suicidal thoughts gives them permission to talk about it.
Okay.
right? If you ask a healthy person, who's clear, and you say, "Hey, are you having any suicidal thoughts?" The answer is no.
Okay. So in terms of like depression and anxiety, how should a coach or even a parent go about it without making the kid or athlete feel bad?
First, being aware, being open to having a difficult conversation, um, and then just be aware. Like, watch what they're doing. If it's a parent and a child, if your child loves drawing, and you ask them, "Hey, you're drawing," and they're like, "No, I don't like to do that anymore," but they've done it their entire lives, something might be up, right? Or like, are they giving away stuff? Are they ending relationships? Like, are they breaking up with a girlfriend for no good reason? We have to be mindful. What are they listening to? Movies. All those things we need to be aware of. And then if you have the thought, just ask him point blank. Don't beat around the bush. Hey, are you having suicidal thoughts?
Okay.
Because if we beat around the bush and we say, "Hey, are you okay?" Of course, the answer is, "Yep, I'm fine."
Okay. I know for me as a coach, it's a little bit I wouldn't say easier, but I have less kids to deal with in terms of what to look for. I know my friend Johnny, he when he was a football coach, obviously in a football team, you have a a lot more kids to deal with. For me, the most kids I ever dealt with are like 20, 22, and it was divided between three coaches. Johnny was telling me that, I mean, between him, it was a little bit over 30, I want to say. So
Wow.
how do you divide your attention to make sure each individual kid, I mean, from a therapist perspective, that you're being aware of how everybody is dealing with the surroundings?
Yeah, that would be difficult, right? Because what's the goal of a coach, right? Is I'm assuming, right, depending on the age group of the kids, is like, are you learning it, teaching them to have fun doing it? Are you teaching them the game? All these things. But I think like the best thing a coach could do is notice changes in behavior. Like as you watch the kids practice, of course you're not going to know them first, second, third practice, but by mid-season, right, you kind of got your eye on, okay, this is how this athlete is, and that's how they are. If you notice a change, like a radical change in behavior, that's something you should address quickly.
Okay. As for like bullying, I know me and Johnny talked about this a lot. Are there any early signs that as a coach that we can see so we can prevent such things?
Yeah, I would. Again, any changes in behavior, you want to watch. Because I know sometimes on teams, like the 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 athletes who are, um, I guess, better, right? What sometimes they'll do is they'll make fun of the less talented to help motivate them to keep pushing them. But I think there's a fine line between pushing a teammate and making them feel bad, for not being at their level. Like, look for signs. Do you have 3, 4 kids who are razzing the kid in the middle? Or is it the quiet kid? And then you should address that.
Okay. So there was a situation about a friend of mine. His son plays football. He was being bullied, and being military, all of us military guys were sitting around. They were giving him like different ideas, like kind of like 60s, 70s. Oh, you just need to tell your kid to grab him by the helmet,
Oh no.
yeah, toughen up, etc. And I was very surprised about my buddy because he comes from a special forces in the army. He said no. He went and talked to the coach. First, he talked to his son, and then he asked him, well, how he felt. He's like, well, you know what? It's starting. It's bothering me. And he's like, would you like me to go talk to the coach? And he's like, no, it's okay. So his dad still went and talked to the coach. He's like, hey, my son mentioned this is happening. What's going on? So the coach actually told him, he's like, the reason why this young kid is bullying your son, is because he's actually jealous of him because he's doing a lot better. He's playing a lot more. He plays on defense and in offense, so he's doing a lot better. So the kid is just being jealous.
Wow.
He said that everything just gonna resolve itself. I brought up the same thing to Johnny. Johnny said that he always talked to his athletes. He's like, "Hey, listen, we don't bully in our team. this is you're not gonna do that. You guys are part of a team. Try to bring them around. So
Yep.
from your perspective, two different coaches, I guess different scenario, could be different scenarios, but same effect. From your personal, professional advice, how would you tell a coach to deal with such things?
Um, First, I like the way your friend talked to his kid,
Mhm.
right? Because we have that natural instinct to protect our children, So I think that was really cool to ask him, even though he did the exact opposite of what his kid told him. But I do like the communication part of that. The coach, I think there's a learning opportunity there,
Mhm.
not for the kid being bullied, for the bully. Of like, hey man, this would be the coach saying, hey, I've been seeing this thing. What's up, man? Because I know you're a nice kid. You wouldn't do that. Why? What's going on here? And I
Okay.
think again, but asking a coach with 30 players, that's a lot of time. But that's why most teams have like an assistant coach or someone, maybe if the head coach doesn't have time.
Okay, another thing that me and Johnny talked about is how the lack of support and the lack of people coming in to these like programs, especially like rec programs, lack of
Hmm.
support in terms of like mental health, you know. So
Yeah.
I know me and Johnny talked about like they need a little bit more support. In your opinion, you've been doing this for like 10 plus years. Uh,
Yep.
do you think that this should be like rec leagues should be given like some sort of like therapist or like a number that they can call in terms of like, for example, like suicide, anxiety, and
Absolutely.
depression?
Absolutely.
In following on that thing, and so what would be if a coach doesn't know how to go about it? Like, are there any numbers that they can call or anything like that?
Hmm. Yep. So there's it's 741-741. If a person texts hello to 741-741, somebody from a crisis will text them back in like 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, I did not know that. Well, good to know. Definitely gonna pass on to my rec league. Uh,
Hmm.
in terms of like bullying, I know you say you work with kids. Do you find that kids have a hard time opening up to you, like in terms of like bullying at all?
Uh, Usually the initial appointment they do,
Mhm.
because they don't know me, and especially if it's virtual, it takes a little bit longer to build that rapport. If they're in my office, depending on their relationship with their parents, and like, are their parents making them come? Was it their idea, right? That will have an effect on our rapport building. But usually by the second, third appointment, I'll know most everything. Because I asked directly about bullying.
Okay. Uh, so in terms of like let's say I see something going on with a bully better yet, let's see say I see a kid with depression or anxiety. Should me from a coach talk to the parent first and have them sent straight into therapy, or should we just get to know him a little bit more? I would like see how he's dealing with.
Um, Depending what part of the season, like if it's day one, right, you might want to take something, right? Like, hey, let me take a second, unless like it's obvious, like the kid's not making eye contact, his head's down, he's making suicidal threats, those kind of things. I would go directly to the parent.
Okay.
Um, but if it's everyone looks like they're playing, or be normal teenagers, whatever that right normal. But then you see a change, I would talk to the kid, right? Because you probably have some sort of rapport built with them, and that might be advantageous for you, is because you're not a parent,
Okay.
and some kids don't want to talk to their parents about it.
Okay. Uh,
But if they say suicide though, that immediately, that's our trigger of like, okay, that's out of my ballpark. Now I need to go to the parents.
Okay. One last thing that I want to talk about. I know Johnny and I talked about the stigma of being tough. You know, uh, And I personally don't like that stigma, because if you're hurt, I mean, you shouldn't like make yourself any worse in terms of like mental health or like physicality. I'm just not okay with it. Even when I had any kids fall, like twist their ankles or anything, like, no, I can keep playing. I'm like, no, you're just gonna sit out. Like, let me know how you feel second half, and we'll go from there. You know.
Nice.
How can we get away from that stigma? Because I mean, you see it on from professional athletes. Like I was playing on painkillers to bruise ribs, etc., especially like in football.
Right.
How- excuse me. How can we as coaches get away from that, like inbrail into athletes that like it's okay to not play, because I mean,
Hmm.
you're talking about they only have like select amount of years where they can do this sport. So a lot of
Right.
times, especially like for college athletes, they have like they're working on scholarships, like they feel like they need to give back to on the field for that scholarship. So
Yep.
from a therapist perspective, how would you suggest how can we get away from this? I know it's
Oof.
kind of a difficult question.
Yeah, it's oh my God. Like, first, I think the most important thing is for the coach to build trust with his players or her players. So a player can say, "Hey, I'm hurt," right? And you'll be teaching them this the first time they meet you, right? From the very first time that they suit up. If they say, "Oh, I banged my knee," right? Your response is going to tell them how they're going to do this. Excuse me. How do we teach children, the difference between hurt and injured? Like, oh, that hurt, but I can still play is way different than I blew my ACL. So I think by building rapport and trust with your players, they'll feel confident saying, you know what, I don't trust it, and knowing that they're not going to get reprimanded for that,
Okay.
because that's all they need to be like, oh yeah, sure, make them feel worse than they already do, because most of them feel bad that they can't play. But I feel like if their coach is firm but understanding,
Okay.
right, I think you can build that trust right away of like, hey, if you're hurt, I want to know, right? Now, if I think that where it comes in is knowing your players, be like, I don't know if that's a real injury or not, but let's sit you down just to make sure. I like your idea about, hey, you're not, maybe not for this half. We'll check it again second half.
Okay. And so now let's talk about something that can be really measured. For example, like a ruptured ACL, like in terms of like mental health. Like if your player is like depressed, how do you how do you get away from that stigma?
Hmm. I think by talking about it freely and openly,
Okay.
like when you're doing, like when practice is just starting or it's ending, but probably mostly just starting. Everyone's fresh. They're paying attention. Have that discussion. Be like, hey, you know, if any of you guys are having these thoughts, these feelings, please let us know. We want to know, right? Because our goal is to keep you safe too, right? And just make it an open door policy of like, hey, you got something to say? I want to hear it.
Okay.
And I think you can get that done probably for first, because I know usually, like, if I'm doing a group or I'm doing like a volunteer group, I'll have at least one kid come up and say, hey, sometimes I have these feelings and these thoughts, like, each time I do it.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Adam. I appreciate your time. Thanks for everything. And
It's my pleasure.
okay.
Yep, thank you.